Hey everybody, welcome to part 2 of day 2's lecture. Okay, so we know that we had gone over moisturizers slash tenderizers in the first part. Now we're going to go through stabilizers slash tougheners. And remember, if you feel like you're getting overwhelmed or you don't feel like taking notes during this video, that's okay because it's all in the PowerPoint slides that you can access in modules. So, what are our toughening and stabilizing ingredients? 1, we have eggs. 2, we have flour. And 3, we have starch. So, all of these things help our products to be stable. And each one lends itself in a different way. But when we're talking about flour, we've got multiple kinds of flour that we use. Some of them are stronger than others, and some of them are weaker than others. But what does that mean? When we're talking about the strength of a flour, we're talking about the amount of gluten it has in it. So, flour that comes from hard winter wheat has a higher content of gluten in it. And because of that, we're able to make bread flour from it. So bread flour and patent flour, we like to call those strong flours. They've got a lot of gluten in them. Then we have things like AP flour. AP flour is a nice in-between. It's between bread flour and the softer flours. I like to say it's kind of the middle ground. Okay, so AP flour, and then right under AP flour, we have pastry flour. So as we're getting a little bit weaker, the starch content is getting a little bit higher for each one of these flours. So by the time we get down to cake flour, our starch content is high and our gluten content is low. Of course, then we have things like rye flour, which have a very low gluten content just in and of itself. And then we also have nut meals, which have very little gluten in them too, because gluten comes from wheat. So there's no gluten in nut flours and meals. So that's my spiel about flour and flour strength. So let's talk about the next stabilizing ingredient, eggs. When we're using eggs in baking, we use them for multiple different purposes. Yes, we do use it so that we can stabilize products, but we also use them to be aerated. And sometimes we're just going to be using the egg yolk, sometimes we'll be using the egg white, sometimes we'll be using the whole egg, or we'll take egg yolk, egg white, foam them up, and then fold them together. So eggs come into play in a lot of different ways in our baking world. And eggs, we know, aids with leavening in a very special way. So we can just leaven a product using eggs without any other ingredient to leaven. So we wouldn't be using yeast, obviously. We wouldn't be using baking soda or baking powder for the acid-alkaline reaction. We would just be using eggs, which is kind of cool that you can do that. So after eggs as the next paramount, when flour is not available, but we still need to stabilize, we throw in an egg, we can go to starch. So starch, in and of itself, is a little bit different in its thickening capabilities. Instead of thickening through coagulation, it's thickening through gelatinization. So starch we use to thicken things like soups and sauces sometimes, and it's great. Cornstarch in and of itself is really special. But cornstarch, it breaks down over time, and then it purges out the liquid. So sometimes that cornstarch that we think is going to be so great if we just make a slurry and put it into a soup, it's going to be wonderful, isn't so wonderful after all because it breaks down over time. Potato starch does the same sort of thing. So what we've ended up doing is modifying that cornstarch and turning it into something we know as waxy maize. So this modified cornstarch, it won't break down in the presence of fruit and acid enzymes like regular cornstarch, and it has a great capability of being frozen and then thawed and still not breaking down. We also use waxy maize when we are making canned pie fillings. So when you go to the store and you buy your Lucky Leaf pie filling or whatever brand you get, and it has that gooey kind of fun stuff that's all surrounding the fruit, that's actually waxy maize. That's what its thickening ingredient is in that. And we know that eggs can be a thickening ingredient in and of themselves too, because we use it for creme brulee. And obviously flour is its own thickening ingredient too, because we use it for roux. So each one of these things are a thickening, stabilizing, toughening ingredient. And we're always making sure that our ratio is balancing off of all of these things. So let's move on to some new ingredients. Something that doesn't have anything to do really with anything other than flavor and, I don't know, texture at times. Let's talk about nuts. So nuts are utilized for texture. We make pastes out of them. We make flavoring agents out of them. But we need to know the proper names for some of them. Now, we all have heard of a hazelnut. And hazelnuts are awesome. So we use them to make pastes and things like that we later go and flavor things with. But a hazelnut is not always labeled a hazelnut. Sometimes we use its French term, noisette, or we will use its American regional name, filbert. But sometimes when you're ordering things, it's going to be labeling it as noisette or filbert flour. So you need to know that that's a hazelnut. So if you're ordering filbert flour, you're actually ordering hazelnut flour. So that's kind of important to know. The next nut that I want to talk about are pecans. Pecans grow around here. They're wonderful. We use them in everything. We put them into pralines. They're fantastic, right? We know what a pecan looks like. It's regional to our area. So that's the primary nut that we use down here because it grows down here. And then there's almonds. Okay, we make almond butter. We make marzipan, which is not almond butter. That's peanut butter. But almond butter, I don't want you to get confused with marzipan. It would be a kind of starting ground for marzipan though. Marzipan is a combination of almonds and sugar that we use for decorative application. And we sometimes make marzipan fruits. A lot of times people will see those. They're really good. I love marzipan, so I can go on and on and on about marzipan. But we also sometimes cover cakes with marzipan, or we just eat the marzipan. When you get into cookies class, it's going to be your first time making marzipan from scratch, so it's kind of fun. But it's used for decorative applications primarily. Now, marzipan's made from almonds, okay? And we have other pastes that are made from different nuts. So we know that marzipan is associated with almonds. We also have almond paste. And then we also have almond butter. Okay, so what about pralines? Let's talk about pralines. We know that pralines are made with pecans here in the United States. But pralines originally were made with almonds. When settlers came to the United States from France, they wanted to make pralines that reminded them of home. But we didn't have almonds because they don't grow here. So they looked for another nut, and that's where they found the pecan and started using it in pralines. And that's why we know of pralines as being made with pecans. However, we have another thing that we use all the time in baking called praline paste. Okay? So obviously, it's probably made with pecans or almonds, right? Nope. Not right. It's actually made with hazelnuts. And now we're starting to make other praline paste that'll have pistachios in them. So we've kind of gone across the world and back again with nuts. And we really have. And that's where they've kind of evolved and turned into what we have today as far as the ordering of things. So you really need to become familiar with all of these different ingredients and where they're coming from and stuff like that. So when you go to order things initially, make sure that you're really checking in and making sure that you're ordering the thing that you actually want. because you don't want to be ordering praline paste thinking it's going to be made up of pecans when it's really made up of hazelnuts and giving you the wrong flavor profile. So that's my spiel on nuts. It's also my spiel on stabilizing ingredients. And this is where I'm going to go ahead and end part 2 of day 2. I know I said that I was probably going to break this into 2 parts, but I've had to break it into more parts, and I'm sure you're going to forgive me, right? Or maybe not. I don't know, but we had to break it into more than 2 parts because it's really long, and I want y'all to not get too totally bored with everything that we're talking about. But get ready. The next part of the lecture is all about yeast, and yeast is super exciting.